But here's another thing you need to know about risk. The end result may not be pretty. That's where the next R word comes in, rejection. There will be times in life when people are, how can I say this? Just not that into you. About a year into my first gig, I decided to leave ABC and head to a fledgling startup known as CNN, or as my snobby network news colleagues called it, Chicken Noodle News. There I would work as a producer and get my first crack at reporting, at the White House no less. In the commercial break before I went on, I could hear the two anchors, and they were talking about me. "Who is that girl?" one asked. "I don't know, but she looks like she's 16 years old." I sounded even younger as I squeaked out, "President Reagan is beginning his day with a meeting in the Oval Office with National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski." The president of CNN called after I appeared. He called the assignment desk and said he never wanted to see me on the air again. Wah, wah. Needless to say, I was devastated. Rejection can be the ultimate reality check. It makes you work harder and get better. My boss at CNN wasn't being mean. He was actually right. I stunk. And speaking of humility, class of 2012, it's time for the tough love portion of the program. They say you have been over-coddled, over-parented, you haven't learned to deal with disappointment or setbacks or rejection because you haven't really had to. After all, everyone made the soccer team and everyone got a trophy, right? A recent article in The Atlantic entitled "How to Land Your Kid in Therapy" asked this question: could it be that by protecting our kids from unhappiness as children, we're depriving them of happiness as adults? In fact, some college students today are so overprotected and fragile, they're known by administrators on campuses across the country as teacups. Sometimes this spills into the workplace when young, entitled employees think they don't have to pay their dues and they want to start at the top. But as Queen Rania of Jordan once said, if you're too big for the small jobs, you're too small for the big ones. And if you're going on interviews, remember this: nothing is a bigger turnoff than a 22-year-old who asks how a job will affect his or her work-life balance. Don't be a teacup, be a travel mug, sturdy and ultimately unbreakable. You may have to work late, work weekends, or as Mike Bloomberg did, show up early. When he was in business school, he worked at a real estate office renting apartments. He had more customers than the 4 full-time professional brokers because he got there before they did, answered the phone, and he got all their business. I'm a firm believer that if you do what you love, you'll love what you do. That said, in order to find yourself, you need to actually be looking and trying new things, not just thinking about it or talking about it. In other words, get a job. It might not be as easy as it used to be, and you may have to hustle a little bit more, but it is still doable. This concludes the tough love portion of the program. Everyone's like, oh man. Okay, now back to me. After CNN, I worked in local news in Miami and Washington, D.C. My big break came when my dear friend and mentor, the late Tim Russert, told me I had spunk. And unlike Lou Grant, Tim likes spunk. So he offered me a job as the deputy Pentagon correspondent for NBC. By 1991, I was the co-anchor of the Today Show, where I spent 15 fantastic years. It was such a privilege to anchor the Today Show, but after one too many 5 a.m. wake-up calls, I was ready for a new chapter. The opportunity to become the first solo female anchor of a network evening newscast was hard to turn down. After all, when I started in TV news back in 1979, there were still plenty of guys who wanted to keep the broads out of broadcasting. But I quickly learned that getting out of your comfort zone can sometimes be, well, uncomfortable. In those first few months at CBS, TV critics wrote about my clothes, my hair, my makeup, even the way I held my hands. Some said I lacked gravitas, which I've since decided is Latin for testicles. It was a rocky start, but I remembered a note a former colleague had written to me as I was leaving NBC. Boats are always safe in the harbor, but that's not what boats are built for. I was determined to ride out the storm, I focused on the news, not the noise, and it got better. 5 years at the CBS Evening News filled me with immense pride and a sense of accomplishment. I learned more about people, perspective, and myself in those 5 years than I had in the previous 49.